Every Christmas Day, Chief Uche distributes fattened chickens to the villagers, earning their trust and admiration. What the villagers don't know is that the chickens are no ordinary gifts, they are what you might call cursed. The moon had begun its descent, sinking behind the trees as Matsi Ugachukwu made his way back to Adi's hut. His thoughts swirled like a maelstrom in his mind, a storm of confusion, fear, and disbelief. The villagers had turned on him, accusing him, blaming him for their suffering. The very people he had once called friends now looked at him with suspicion and anger. He had tried to tell them the truth, tried to explain that their afflictions had come from somewhere far darker than he had ever imagined, but they refused to listen. It was the chickens, they said. It was his fault for accepting them. It was his fault for leading them to Chief Uche. Matsi Ugachukwu's heart sank as he approached Adi's door. He knocked once, lightly, and entered without waiting for a response. Adi's was seated by the fire, her face illuminated by its soft glow, the familiar scent of herbs filling the air. "Matsi Ugachukwu," she said, not looking up from her work, "I knew you would return." He closed the door behind him and walked slowly toward her. His eyes were weary, burdened with the weight of his failed attempt to warn the villagers. "Adi's, I tried to tell them the truth. I told them that something was wrong, that the chickens were not a gift from Chief Uche, but a curse. But they don't believe me. They only blame me." Adi's looked up at him, her gaze calm yet full of a depth he could not fully understand. She motioned for him to sit beside her. "They are blinded by their own desires, Matsi," she said softly. "You cannot fault them for that. Chief Uche has given them what they want: wealth, prosperity, the illusion of good fortune. When someone gives freely, it is difficult to question their motives. People are too eager to receive without understanding the cost." Matsi Ugachukwu sat heavily, his mind racing. "But it's not just wealth, Adi's. The sickness, the strange sounds, the clucking. I don't know how much longer I can bear this. My son is ill, and others too. What am I supposed to do when no one believes me?" Adi's eyes narrowed slightly, her expression thoughtful. "There is a dark truth behind Chief Uche's wealth, Matsi. A truth that few are willing to see. That is why they cannot understand. But you are different. You see what they cannot?" Matsi Ugachukwu felt his pulse quicken. "What truth? What are you saying, Adi's? You've always known something, haven't you?" She nodded slowly, a somber expression crossing her face. "Chief Uche did not come by his wealth honestly. He made a pact, Matsi, a pact with the spirit Agwu Aikna. A spirit of vengeance, one that feeds on the souls of the innocent. In exchange for power, Chief Uche sold his soul, and the souls of the villagers who accept his gifts." Matsi Ugachukwu's breath caught in his throat. "A pact? With Agwu Aikna? But he is a respected man. The villagers love him. They call him a benefactor." Adi's shook her head gravely. "What they see is the outward appearance, Matsi. Chief Uche is a master of deception. He hides behind the gifts he gives, behind the chickens and the wealth, but underneath, he is feeding the spirit, sending souls to Agwu Aikna in exchange for his own power." Matsi Ugachukwu stood, his hands trembling at his sides. "This is madness, Adi's. How could they not see it? How could they not realize that Chief Uche is the cause of their suffering? Their desire for comfort blinds them, Matsi," she replied, her voice firm. "They do not want to believe that their wealth came at such a terrible price. But you know the truth now. And you must decide what to do with it?" His thoughts collided with one another, overwhelming him. He had come to Adi's for answers, but the truth was far darker than he had imagined. "But what can I do, Adi's? The villagers are against me. They won't believe me. They will only blame me more." Adi's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You must be strong, Matsi Ugachukwu. You must find a way to show them the truth. The villagers are lost in their blindness, but they will listen if you are patient. If you are willing to fight for them." The next morning, Matsi Ugachukwu returned to the village. His mind was heavy with Adi's words, and the truth she had revealed weighed on him like a boulder. He knew what he had to do, but deep in his heart, he was unsure if the villagers would ever listen. As he walked through the market square, the usual sounds of life seemed muted. The laughter of children, the clink of pots, and the bustle of people going about their business all felt distant, as though the village was holding its breath. When the villagers saw him, they fell silent. Eyes followed him from every corner, filled with suspicion and distrust. "Matsi Ugachukwu," a voice called from the crowd. It was Chief Uche, standing with his arms crossed, a slight smile on his lips. "You have returned. I trust you have spoken to Adise. She is a wise woman, is she not?" Matsi Ugachukwu swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain calm. "Adise, yes," he said, his voice steady. "And I have learned the truth. Chief Uche, your gifts have a dark price. You have made a pact with Agwu, a spirit that feeds on the souls of the innocent. The sickness in this village, the strange happenings, the suffering, it all comes from you." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd, but Chief Uche remained unfazed. He stepped forward, his smile never faltering. "Matsi, you speak of things you do not understand. Agwu is an ancient spirit, yes, but I have no dealings with such forces. These gifts I have given are simply a way to share my good fortune with the people of Obiọha. You should be grateful, not fearful." The villagers nodded in agreement, their eyes shifting between Matsi Ugachukwu and Chief Uche. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and disbelief, their minds clouded by the very gifts that had ensnared them. They did not want to believe that the source of their suffering was the man they had come to adore. One woman stepped forward, shaking her head. "What are you saying, Matsi? Chief Uche has been nothing but kind to us. He has shared his wealth, given us food, and helped us prosper. And now you stand here accusing him of witchcraft? You have lost your mind?" Matsi Ugachukwu felt a pang of desperation in his chest. "Please, listen to me. I am not lying. Chief Uche has sold us all to a vengeful spirit. Don't you see what's happening? The sickness, the sounds, the darkness that is creeping into our lives, it all comes from him." But the crowd only grew more agitated, murmuring among themselves, shaking their heads, and pointing fingers. "Enough of this nonsense," another man shouted. "You speak as though you are cursed, Matsi Ugachukwu. But you are the one who has brought this upon us. It is you who made us accept the chickens. It is your fault." Matsi Ugachukwu's voice broke as he spoke, the weight of the villagers' accusations crushing him. "I did not bring this curse upon us. I tried to warn you, but you would not listen. Chief Uche has sold us to Agwu in exchange for his wealth. That is the truth." But the villagers were not listening. They were too wrapped up in the comfort of the gifts, too blinded by their greed, to see the truth that Matsi Ugachukwu had uncovered. They could not comprehend that the very man they had trusted was the one who had brought this darkness into their lives. "You are lying, Matsi Ugachukwu," a voice cried from the crowd. "You are the one who has brought this curse. You have ruined us." Matsi Ugachukwu stood there, his body trembling with frustration, his heart heavy with sorrow. He had no more words to say. The villagers had made up their minds. They had chosen their path. And he? He was alone. The crowd continued to murmur, casting their accusations upon him like stones, until, at last, he turned and walked away. As he left, he heard their voices behind him, angry, fearful, and resolute. They had turned against him. The truth he carried was too heavy for them to bear. And in the midst of it all, Chief Uche stood, watching, his smile widening ever so slightly, as though he knew something the villagers did not. Something darker. The air was thick with tension as the villagers gathered in the market square under the pale light of the full moon. Shadows stretched long and jagged across the dirt ground, cast by the flickering glow of lanterns and torches. Despite the protests and accusations hurled at Matsi Ugachukwu earlier, the eerie events in Obiọha had escalated. The once thriving village now seemed gripped by an invisible force, suffocating its spirit. Adise, the village herbalist, stood quietly to the side, her weathered face impassive. She watched as Chief Uche, ever the benefactor, moved through the crowd with a calm, almost regal demeanor. He greeted people warmly, his charm disarming even the most skeptical. His presence seemed to offer reassurance, a stark contrast to the gnawing fear consuming everyone else. In the center of the square, Matsi Ugachukwu stood defiantly. He had spent days pleading with the villagers, trying to open their eyes to the truth. But their trust in Chief Uche, coupled with the lure of his gifts, had clouded their judgment. "You must see reason," Matsi Ugachukwu shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Look around you. The sickness, the nightmares, the misfortunes, they began the moment Chief Uche started his so-called generosity. He is not our savior, he is our curse." The crowd murmured, uneasy, but Chief Uche raised a hand, silencing them. "Matsi Ugachukwu," he said, his voice smooth and steady, "I have tolerated your baseless accusations for long enough. You have brought fear and division into this village. And for what? To deflect from your own failures?" The villagers nodded, some muttering agreements. A woman in the crowd called out, "Why would he curse us when he has given us so much? Chickens for our feasts, money for our needs, Chief Uche has only helped us." Matsi Ugachukwu shook his head, his fists clenched. "He helps you to hurt you. Those gifts come at a price paid with your very souls." Laughter erupted from the crowd, bitter and mocking. A man jeered, "Souls, you say? Perhaps it is your soul that is cursed, Matsi Ugachukwu. You bring nothing but doom with your words." Adi stepped forward at last, her staff tapping against the ground. The villagers fell silent at her presence, even their skepticism did not extend to the village herbalist. She looked at Matsi Ugachukwu with an unreadable expression, then turned her gaze to the crowd. "The gods are silent," she said, her voice low and even. "I have sought their guidance, and they give no clear answers." Matsi Ugachukwu stared at her, betrayal flashing in his eyes. "Adis, you know the truth. You told me about the pact, about Agwu Aikna. Why won't you tell them?" Adi's gaze did not waver. "What I know is for you and me alone, Matsi. The villagers must choose their path without interference." "That's not enough," he shouted, his voice echoing in the still night. "They need to know. They need to understand." But the villagers were unmoved. Their loyalty to Chief Uche remained unshaken. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse, returning to their homes with whispers of pity for Matsi Ugachukwu and praise for Chief Uche. As the night deepened, Matsi Ugachukwu sat outside his hut, his head in his hands. His son lay inside, his fever worsening, his breath shallow. The weight of his failure pressed down on him like a boulder. He had fought for the village, risked everything to protect them, but they had turned their backs on him. Footsteps approached, and he looked up to see Chief Uche standing before him, a sly smile on his face. "You tried, Matsi," he said, his tone almost mocking. "But you see now, don't you? The villagers will never believe you. They love me too much." "You're a monster," Matsi Ugachukwu spat, his voice filled with venom. "You've doomed us all." Chief Uche chuckled softly. "Doomed? No, Matsi. I've given them hope. They don't want the truth, they want comfort. And I provide it. You see, it's not about curses or spirits, it's about power. And I have it." Matsi Ugachukwu rose to his feet, his fists trembling. "One day, they'll see through your lies. One day, your power will crumble." Chief Uche stepped closer, his smile growing wider. "Perhaps. But by then, I will have moved on. You should take care of your son, Matsi. The village has already decided who the real curse is." With that, he turned and walked away, his shadow stretching long in the moonlight. Months passed, and life in Obiọha returned to a fragile semblance of normalcy. The sicknesses and misfortunes continued, but the villagers clung to Chief Uche, convinced that his gifts were their salvation. Matsi Ugachukwu remained an outcast, his warnings dismissed as the ramblings of a bitter man. His son's health slowly improved under Adi's care, but the rift between him and the village grew wider with each passing day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Chief Uche packed his belongings and left Obiọha. No one knew where he went, but the villagers mourned his departure, praising his generosity and lamenting the loss of their benefactor. Matsi Ugachukwu watched him go from a distance, a mixture of anger and relief in his heart. The man who had brought darkness to their village was gone, but his shadow lingered. The gifts, the sickness, the fear, it would all remain, a testament to the price they had paid for their greed. And somewhere far away, Chief Uche began anew, his pact with Agwu Aikna unbroken, his wealth and power growing ever stronger. The village of Obiọha had survived, but the scars of Chief Uche's curse would never fade. And for Matsi Ugachukwu, the burden of knowing the truth would forever weigh heavy on his soul. Let us know in the comment section if you want to know what happened next in this story. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe and check our channel for more amazing stories like this.